Hello and welcome to the Inside Southwest Florida Football Preview Show. I'm Dustin Levy, joined by Dan DeLuca here to bring you the latest on the gridiron in Southwest Florida. Week 1 is in the books. We are going to get into discussing some of those games as we dive into our Week 2 slate. So before we get into some of those games, we're going to go through our records from last week for our picks. Dan and I are both tied, picking 8 games right, 2 wrong. And producer Ed Reed went 7-3. So we'll see if we'll be able to get some separation this week. There are a lot of games that could go either way, so I think there's a pretty good chance. First on the slate is Tampa Jesuit at Bishop Verot. These teams played last year. Jesuit won 33-14. Verot is coming off a game where they were shut out against John Carroll. The defense played very well, however, holding John Carroll to 17 points. We kind of saw a little bit of this last year where the Vikings were unable to play kind of complementary football against some of these top teams. And, they'll have their hands full with Jesuit. Freshman quarterback Jack Griffin, the younger brother of Florida quarterback Will Griffin, had a really good outing last week, throwing 4 touchdown passes. I think until I see more of that complementary football that I mentioned from Verot, it's tough to pick them. Ed went with Verot this week, but I'm going to go with Jesuit. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think Jesuit just a little bit further along now. Verot, until we see that offense get going, I'm not sure this is the week we think they'd have a breakout. I mean, Jesuit, aside from Griffin on offense and the receivers that they also have 2 standout linebackers, a 4-star Texas A&M commit and Caden Henderson, and a Duke commit and Trip Keller. I don't think that's the type of defense that you can expect Verot to kind of break out against. So I think Jesuit just has a little bit too much. So I'm going to pick the Tigers also.
Next up, Naples at Manatee. Dan, you've seen Manatee quite a few times over the last couple of years. Do you think the Golden Eagles can pull off a road win here?
I don't think so. I think Manatee is starting to come along and kind of get back to where they were in previous years as one of the premier teams on the west coast of Florida. Put up a lot of yards last week, 450 yards of offense, but they lost 33-26 to a pretty good Tampa Plant team. So I think that's going to be tough for a Naples defense that has just 3 returning starters back to kind of hold down. They put up a good effort last week against Riverview, had them tied at halftime, but the Rams pulled away in the second half, ended up winning 41-21. First time starting quarterback in Devin Dunford going up against Manatee defense. I think that's a lot to ask. So I'm going to go with the Hurricanes.
Yeah, I was at that Riverview game last week. It was tied 14-14 at the half, but Riverview was able to pull away for a 42-21 win. What I liked about Naples is despite the change at quarterback, Devin Dunford is the starting safety. He had 3 games of practice. They still look like Naples. They have 3 returners on the offensive line. It really showed. Javon Raphael had a really good game, rushing for over 100 yards and a touchdown. But like you said, the way Manatee was able to play last week and the youth of Naples defense, I think is a little too big a task for the Golden Eagles here. So I'm also taking Manatee. Ed is taking Naples. Next game on the slate, Cypress Lake at Cape Coral. I think Cape Coral is going to win this handily. Dan, I know you saw the Seahawks last week. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I think Cape Coral just has a little bit too much on offense. You kind of see Cypress Lake. They're really in a real rebuild right now, giving up 70 points, finishing with negative rushing yards last week against Dunbar. It's just not at that level. And this is kind of a good game maybe for Cape Coral to kind of get their breath a little bit. They've really been shredded the last 2 weeks. I mean, one was the preseason against South Fort Myers. They gave up, over 300 rushing yards, including almost 200 to Jadon Henderson. Did that again last week against, Port Charlotte, one of the premier teams, on this coast that went to the Final Four last year. They rushed for almost 400 yards, including Logan Flaherty, the quarterback, FSU commit. He rushed for 242 yards on just 12 carries, so 20 plus yards a carry. Cape Coral really has to figure out how to stop the run. I mean, they do have a young defense, guys just getting out of their lanes. So I think, playing a Cypress Lake team that still has a ways to go is kind of a way for Cape Coral to get some positive things going on defense, but that's going to be a unit that's going to have to get a whole lot better if the Seahawks want to reach, the heights that they think they can reach this year.
And Ed is also going with the Seahawks in that one. Next game, Immokalee at Lely. Dan, who you got here?
I think it's Immokalee. They beat Clewiston 54-12 last week in the Harvest Bowl. Clewiston isn't a great team, but Immokalee played really well. Jaden Calgill threw for 3 touchdowns, rushed for 3 more. Lely, on the other hand, like Cypress Lake, gave up 10 touchdowns to Gulf Coast, including 4 interceptions that were returned for touchdowns in a 66-0 loss. I think Lely, they're kind of in that same stage sort of as Cypress Lake where, they're trying to rebuild under a new coach, and it's going to take some time. So I think Immokalee gets this one pretty easily.
Yeah, I agree with you. The fact that Lely gave up 250 rushing yards to Gulf Coast last week, and how good Jaden Calgill and Uvensley Methodist looked running the ball last week for the Indians. This should be a win for Immokalee, and Ed agrees. He also picked Immokalee. Next game, we have Lehigh at Fort Myers. I was at this game last year. It went to overtime. Fort Myers won. I believe it was Coach Sirianni's last win coaching the Greenies. I think this will be very competitive. Both teams are coming off of shutout losses. Lehigh against South Fort Myers against Charlotte. I'm going to give the edge to Lehigh here because I was at that game, against South Fort Myers last week. Even though it wasn't pretty at times, you could still see what they were trying to do. You still see the identity that they have with, their 2 running backs that can do a mix of different things. I like them to get the win on the road here. It's tough to not pick Fort Myers at home, but I am going to go with Lehigh. Dan?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is kind of a toss-up game, and you kind of saw it last year. Lehigh really, should have probably won that game, ended up losing in overtime. Fort Myers, I mean, their big problem this year has been turnovers. They turned the ball over a bunch in the preseason game, turned it over 4 times last week, 3 interceptions by Anthony Mendez. Charlotte also returned a fumble for a touchdown. The defense didn't play bad against Charlotte, but Fort Myers has to do a better job of taking care of the ball. It's the first home game of the season for Fort Myers, so that means it's Sam Sirianni's senior night. That's been a game where Fort Myers has traditionally played very well. They've always played well against Lehigh. They are 20-0 all time against the Lightning. And I'm going to go with the Green Wave. I think they'll find a way at home. There's always a lot of emotion on this night, and if they can take care of the ball, they can beat Lehigh, but it won't be easy.
Yeah, Ed is also picking Fort Myers in that one. Next game we are going to discuss is Dunbar at North Fort Myers. Traditionally, has been a fun rivalry over the years. Dan, who do you have winning this one?
Well, I don't know how you pick against Dunbar at this point with what they've been able to show on offense, even without their regular starting quarterback, Braden Seabrook, who sat out last week. They're just so dynamic, and they just have so many weapons. And when you can score from anywhere on the field, it puts so much pressure on the opposing team, that maybe puts together a good drive, gets a field goal, or is able to, kind of grind out a drive, get in the end zone, and then Dunbar runs the kickoff back 50 yards and then scores on the next play. It just takes a lot out of you. And I think Dunbar just has too much firepower.
Yeah, Ed is going with Dunbar here, and so am I. Ryan Johnson had a good performance at quarterback for the Red Knights this past week. I am curious looking at the Dunbar defense. It's been 6 quarters and no one scored on them. So that's an intriguing aspect of this game. But I think that offense is going to be too much for North to handle. We are going to look next at Gulf Coast at Charlotte. Both teams coming off of wins. I think the Sharks are one of the most slept-on teams in the area. Compared to a lot of the teams that might be ranked above them, I just don't have as many questions about Gulf Coast. Gio Marenko last week did Gio Marenko things We know what that offense does. And then the defense forcing a bunch of turnovers. Like you said, 5 interceptions last week. Dante Lindsay with a pair. They have a real identity, and I'm going to take them to get the road win here against Charlotte. Dan?
Yeah, I agree. Gulf Coast, we had a lot of teams that made coaching changes in the offseason, but Gulf Coast, they promoted an assistant, Tommy Kleinmeyer. So things kind of stayed intact, and they also were able to retain a lot of players. They didn't lose a bunch in transfers. They actually got Marenko back, who had, maybe I was starting to practice at Naples, ended up going back to Gulf Coast. So there's a lot of continuity there, even though they have a new head coach at the helm. And I think they're going to do what they do, which is run the football. And I think that'll be successful enough. I like Gulf Coast.
Ed is also taking Gulf Coast here. The next game, Barron Collier at ECS. Dan, who do you have winning this one?
I think I'm going to go with Barron Collier. ECS last week fell down 21-0 to First Baptist. Almost came all the way back, but ended up losing 21-20. Barron Collier beat Palmetto Ridge 48-7. Their new quarterback, Maximus McKiernan, looked pretty good, throwing for 255 yards, 2 touchdowns, including a 99-yard touchdown pass. Again, I just think Barron Collier a little too much firepower on offense. I think the Cougars will find a way on the road.
Yeah, and McKiernan did all that in just the first half. So that's a really impressive debut for the signal caller for the Cougars. I'm also going to take Barron here. Ed is picking Barron here to get the win on the road. But I think ECS did show, some fight in that game against First Baptist. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a really good competitive game. Next game we're going to discuss is Ida Baker at Aubrey Rogers. Both teams coming off of wins. Both teams that feel like they're headed in the right direction, trending in the right direction. And one of these teams is about to go 2-0. I'm going to pick Aubrey Rogers here. Just the home factor. I think this could be a really good game, but I'm taking the Patriots. Dan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think this will be a 1-score game. Both teams can really run the football. I showed that last week. Baker, more than 350 rushing yards against Bonita Springs in a 33-6 win. And Aubrey Rogers, which had been kind of known for kind of throwing the ball all over the field, they went for almost 280 yards, beating Moorhaven 32-7. Sophomore Liam Neary goes for 173 yards and 1 touchdown. They still do have a little bit of an effective passing game also, and I kind of like what they're doing down there at Aubrey. So I think they'll find a way to win.
And Ed is also going with the Patriots. Last game on the slate, our game of the week, another Thursday night game, South Fort Myers at Riverdale. One interesting aspect here is that Riverdale did not lose a home game last season. In the last 2 seasons, they are 15-1. I think back to last season when they had, a win against Estero last year that wasn't so pretty, but they went on to really take it to South a couple weeks later. Once again, Riverdale is coming off a win against Estero that wasn't all that pretty, but defense was incredibly clutch, forcing 5 turnovers, and Ray Fulgues had a very good solid outing in his regular season debut with the Raiders. South Fort Myers, on the other hand, I think one factor that stands out to me is Jaden Henderson at quarterback. When he was at Cypress Lake last season, he beat Riverdale. He was very clutch in that game. This is going to be a tough one to call. I think it's going to be close. Coach Holderfield, when I spoke to him last week, he said this is going to feel like a playoff game in week 2. A lot of emotion tied to this game. But I think in order for it to be a real rivalry, both teams need to win. The last 2 contests between these two teams has gone to the Raiders. So I'm going to take South Fort Myers winning in round 3. Dan, what about you?
No, I agree. I think South has kind of been stewing over this game for a year. They lost 43-18 last year. That was one of their most lopsided losses, aside from they lost by 5 touchdowns to Lely in week 11, which, both teams were already in the playoffs. I don't know, kind of how that game played out. But I know, with all the coaching crossover between South Fort Myers and Riverdale, there's that kind of rivalry there. And really, I think South Fort Myers is just better this year. I think they're better on offense with Henderson, who adds a layer of athleticism and just some dynamic playmaking ability that Will Bickler didn't have last year. I mean, Will Bickler may be a little bit of a better passer, and he was an effective runner, but he wasn't the weapon that Henderson is. And now you add Tanaris Curse as another wide receiver. Arthur Galashaw, still a very good running back. And I like that South front seven. The secondary is a little bit of a weakness for South, but I'm not sure that Riverdale has the passing game to really exploit that. I know Rayfield Guest went for 250 yards or so against Estero, but I don't think he's going to have the kind of time to throw against that South Fort Myers front that he did have against Estero. And I just don't think Riverdale is there yet. I know they forced 5 turnovers on defense, but Estero was in scoring position an awful lot against the Raiders. And really, if Estero took care of the ball, they win that game. And I don't know if the Riverdale running game is really where it was last year at this point, if they're physical enough really yet to kind of handle that South Fort Myers front. And I just think South really wants this game. I really think they do. They got a bad taste from last year, and I think the Wolfpack will win.
And Ed agrees with us both. He's also picking South Fort Myers. That wraps up our pick segment for the week. Thank you guys for tuning in. Please follow us along on Thursday and Friday nights at news-press.com and naplesnews.com and on Instagram at newspresssports and NDN Prep Zone. Thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you next week.